They thought I was the family failure. For 15 years, they whispered about me at dinner tables, rolled their eyes when my name came up, and made excuses for why I couldn't hold down a real job. They had no idea I was commanding operations that would never make the evening news. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The secure phone buzzed at 0347 hours. I rolled out of my rack in the officers' quarters at Naval Special Warfare Command, feet hitting the cold floor before my brain fully engaged. Outside, the Pacific fog clung to the coastline like classified intel, thick, impenetrable, and hiding everything that mattered. "Admiral Mitchell," I answered, voice steady despite the hour. "Ma'am, we have a situation developing off the Horn of Africa. DEV-DRU needs immediate authorization for cross-border pursuit." I was already reaching for my uniform. Time frame? 30 minutes until the window closes. Patch me through to the team leader. The conversation that followed lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. 4 minutes to authorize an operation that would save 12 hostages and prevent an international incident. 4 minutes that would never appear in any newspaper, never earn a medal ceremony, never make my mother understand why I chose this life over the one she'd planned for me. By 0400, I was in the command center, surrounded by screens showing satellite feeds, tactical positions, and the faces of operators who trusted my judgment with their lives. The mission designation was Neptune's Trident. The location was classified. The outcome would determine whether 14 families would see their loved ones again. "Phoenix team is in position, Admiral," came the voice through my headset. Staff Sergeant Martinez, 24 years old, 3 deployments, mother of twins, back in San Diego. She didn't know those details about her personal life weren't in any file. I made it my business to know the people under my command. "Copy, Phoenix. You have the green light for Phase 1. I watched the thermal imaging as Martinez and her team moved through the compound. Every decision they made in the next hour would ripple outward in ways they'd never see. That's the weight of command in special operations. You carry the consequences of choices made in darkness by people whose names the world will never know." The operation concluded at 0647. 12 hostages were extracted. 0 casualties. The kind of clean success that looks effortless on paper but required 18 months of intelligence gathering, 3 weeks of mission planning, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated good officers from dead ones. "Excellent work, Phoenix team. RTB when ready." "Roger that, Admiral. Thanks for the green light." I pulled off my headset and walked to the window overlooking the training compound. Dawn was breaking over Coronado, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the ocean as a kid growing up in landlocked Ohio. Before I knew that water could be a battlefield. Before I understood that some fights happen in places so secret that victory feels like silence. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. "Your mother called the main number again. She wants to know if you're still playing sailor and when you're coming home to get a real job." I deleted the message without responding. Catherine Mitchell thought her daughter was a career military disappointment, who'd peaked at lieutenant commander and spent her time pushing papers at some minor naval facility in California. She had no idea that the woman she lectured about responsibility and success was the youngest flag officer in naval special warfare history. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every Sunday, Catherine held court at the country club in Columbus, lamenting to her bridge partners about her daughter who, quote, threw away her potential to join the military instead of accepting the partnership offer at Morrison, Klein & Associates, the law firm where she'd arranged for me to work right out of Harvard Law, the job I'd turned down to attend officer candidate school. "She could have been making partner by now," Catherine would tell anyone who'd listen. "Instead, she's out there playing G.I. Joe at 38 years old." What Catherine didn't know was that while she complained about my choices, I was briefing senators on counterterrorism operations. While she worried about my lack of a husband and children, I was coordinating with Allied commanders across 3 time zones. While she told her friends I was wasting my education, I was using my law degree to navigate international maritime law in situations where one wrong interpretation could start a war. The secure line rang again. This time it was Admiral Thompson from JSOC. "Sarah, We need you in DC tomorrow. The SecDef wants to discuss expanding the maritime interdiction program. I'll catch the red eye tonight. Bring the Phoenix team files. Congress is asking questions about resource allocation. I almost laughed. Resource allocation. That was Washington speaking for justify why we spend money on operations that don't exist. Tomorrow I'd sit in a room with men who wore their medals on their dress uniforms and explain why programs like Neptune's Trident were worth funding, even though their success could never be measured in headlines or approval ratings. After hanging up, I walked back to my quarters to pack. The walls were bare except for a single photograph, my commissioning ceremony at Newport. I was 25, fresh-faced, convinced I could serve my country and still make my family proud. My parents had attended the ceremony. Catherine spent the entire time asking other families what their children planned to do after this military phase. She never understood that for some of us, this wasn't a phase, it was a calling. The truth was, I'd been selected for naval intelligence before I'd even graduated from OCS. My law background and language skills, I spoke fluent Arabic and Mandarin, made me valuable for operations that required legal precision and cultural understanding. By 27, I was working counterintelligence. By 30, I was running assets in the Middle East. By 35, I had my first star. None of which my family knew, because none of which I could tell them. The secure communications protocols that governed my life meant that Admiral Sarah Mitchell existed in a parallel universe from Sarah, the disappointing daughter who couldn't settle down and practice law like a normal person. Sarah who came home for Christmas and listened to lectures about wasting her potential while mentally calculating the number of lives saved by operations she'd authorized that quarter. My mother's latest obsession was my cousin Jennifer, who'd just been promoted to senior associate at a firm in Chicago. Jennifer bought a house, Catherine would say during our monthly phone calls. She's planning a wedding for next spring. She has a real career, Sarah. Something stable. I'd listen without comment. Because how do you explain that your idea of stability involves knowing that nuclear submarines are in position to prevent international incidents? How do you tell your mother that while Jennifer was negotiating contracts for corporate mergers, you were negotiating the release of American hostages? The answer was simple. You don't. The classified nature of my work meant that Admiral Mitchell lived in a world of necessary secrets. My family saw the surface. A career military officer who'd never married, never bought a house, never seemed to accomplish anything they could brag about at social gatherings. What they couldn't see was the weight of decisions that shaped global security, the responsibility for operations that prevented wars before they started, the burden of knowledge that came with clearance levels they didn't know existed. As I packed for DC, my phone chimed with an email from Catherine. The subject line read, "Important family news." Inside was an invitation to my cousin Jennifer's engagement party. The kind of elaborate affair Catherine loved, a chance to show off successful family members and remind everyone else of their shortcomings. I stared at the invitation, printed on heavy cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. The event was in 3 weeks, back home in Columbus. The kind of gathering where Catherine would introduce me as my daughter, the one who's still in the military, with the same tone she might use to say the one with the gambling problem. For a moment I considered declining. It would be easier to stay on the West Coast, to remain in the world where Admiral Mitchell was respected and valued. But something about the invitation nagged at me. Maybe it was the formal language, or the fact that it was addressed to Ms. Sarah Mitchell instead of using my rank. Maybe it was the realization that in 3 weeks, I'd be sitting at another family gathering, listening to subtle criticisms about my choices, while carrying the weight of operations that would never see daylight. I closed my laptop and finished packing. Tomorrow I'd brief the Secretary of Defense on programs that were saving lives across 3 continents. In 3 weeks, I'd go home to Ohio and pretend to be the family disappointment. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. The woman they thought had accomplished nothing was accomplishing everything they'd never understand. The Pentagon briefing lasted 4 hours. Senators asked pointed questions about budget allocations, while I explained why maritime interdiction programs couldn't be measured in traditional metrics. Success in my world was measured in incidents that never happened, headlines that never ran, families that never received devastating phone calls. Admiral Mitchell, Senator Reynolds leaned forward, his reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. The committee needs to understand the tangible value of these classified operations. The American people deserve accountability. I chose my words carefully. Senator, last fiscal year, Maritime Special Operations prevented 17 international incidents that could have resulted in American casualties or compromised national security. The Phoenix team alone has maintained a zero casualty success rate across 43 missions. What I couldn't tell him was that 3 of those missions had prevented terrorist attacks on American soil. That information lived behind classification levels that would make his security clearance look like a library card. The flight back to San Diego gave me 6 hours to think about the engagement party invitation sitting in my quarters. Jennifer's celebration would be the first family gathering I'd attended in 2 years. The last one had been Christmas dinner, where Catherine spent the evening comparing my accomplishments to those of my cousin Marcus, who'd just been promoted to regional sales manager at a pharmaceutical company. Marcus bought a boat, Catherine had announced over dessert. He's taking his whole family to the Bahamas next month. When was the last time you took a vacation, Sarah? I'd wanted to tell her that my last vacation involved coordinating a hostage rescue operation in the Mediterranean while sitting in a situation room for 36 straight hours. Instead, I'd changed the subject to her garden. The plane touched down at Lindbergh Field just after midnight. My driver was waiting, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, one of the few people on base who knew the full scope of my responsibilities. During the 20-minute drive back to Coronado, he updated me on the Phoenix team's current training rotation. Martinez is running the new recruits through urban warfare scenarios. We've got 3 candidates who might make the cut. What's her assessment? 2 have the technical skills but lack the psychological resilience. The third is solid across all metrics. I nodded, making a mental note to review the training files tomorrow. Every decision about personnel carried exponential consequences. One wrong judgment call about a candidate could mean mission failure, which could mean American lives lost in places whose names would never appear in casualty reports. Back in my quarters, I found the invitation exactly where I'd left it, propped against my laptop like a question mark in expensive cardstock. The event was in 18 days. I pulled up my calendar, scanning the classified briefings, training oversight meetings, and operational planning sessions that filled the next 3 weeks. There was a gap, 48 hours between a congressional intelligence briefing and a joint training exercise with British SAS. Just enough time to fly to Columbus, attend Jennifer's party, and return before anyone noticed Admiral Mitchell was missing. The decision felt heavier than authorizing combat operations. In my professional life, I commanded with confidence because I understood the variables, controlled the intelligence, and trusted my training. Family gatherings offered none of those advantages. No amount of strategic planning could prepare you for Catherine's subtle disapproval, or the way relatives asked loaded questions disguised as polite interest. I opened my laptop and began typing a response to Catherine's email. 3 drafts later, I settled on professional neutrality. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be able to attend. Please let Jennifer know I'm looking forward to celebrating with the family. After hitting send, I walked to the window overlooking the training compound. Night exercises were underway, shadows moving with purpose across obstacles designed to simulate real-world scenarios. These operators would trust my judgment with their lives, yet I couldn't figure out how to navigate a family party without feeling like I was entering hostile territory. The secure phone buzzed. Commander Walsh from DFGRU. Admiral, we've got intelligence suggesting a potential situation developing in Southeast Asia. Nothing imminent, but the patterns are similar to the Lagos operation from last year. I pulled up the classified files on my secure terminal. The similarities were troubling. Shipping routes disrupted, communications chatter increasing, known bad actors moving assets into position. The kind of convergence that meant something was building, even if we couldn't see the full picture yet. I want round-the-clock monitoring on those shipping lanes. If this develops into an active threat, we'll need to be ready to move fast. Copy that, ma'am. I'll coordinate with intelligence and have a preliminary assessment on your desk by 0800. After hanging up, I stared at the intelligence reports until the words blurred. This was my reality. monitoring threats that most Americans would never know existed, making preparations for conflicts that might never materialize, carrying the weight of vigilance that couldn't be shared or acknowledged. The next morning brought a cascade of routine crises. A training accident resulted in minor injuries but major paperwork. A joint exercise with NATO allies required diplomatic finesse when equipment compatibility issues threatened to derail months of planning. A congressional staffer called asking for background information on maritime security spending, which meant 2 hours of carefully crafting responses that revealed nothing, while appearing cooperative. By evening, I was exhausted in the particular way that came from managing secrets. Every conversation required filtering. What could be said? What must be omitted? How to sound forthcoming while revealing nothing of substance. It was a mental exercise that most people couldn't sustain for an hour, let alone a career. I was reviewing training reports when my phone chimed with a text from Catherine. "Looking forward to seeing you at Jennifer's party. Everyone's so excited to catch up. Try to wear something other than your uniform for once." The message stung more than it should have. Catherine had no way of knowing that I owned exactly 3 civilian outfits, all purchased for mandatory social functions where wearing a uniform would attract unwanted attention. My closet was filled with dress blues, working uniforms, and tactical gear. The wardrobe of someone whose identity was inseparable from their service. I found myself thinking about Jennifer, who'd always been Catherine's favorite example of family success. Jennifer had graduated from Ohio State with a business degree, joined a reputable law firm, dated appropriately ambitious men, and progressed through life according to a timeline that made sense to people who measured success in conventional terms. What Jennifer had never done was wake up at 3 a.m. to authorize military operations. She'd never carried the responsibility for decisions that could prevent or precipitate international incidents. She'd never lived with the knowledge that her mistakes could cost lives in places she'd never see. But Jennifer was getting married to a partner in her firm, buying a house in a neighborhood Catherine approved of, and planning a life that looked successful from the outside. Meanwhile, Admiral Mitchell was planning how to attend a family party without revealing that she commanded operations that shaped global security. The irony was becoming sharper the more successful I became in my professional life, the more I appeared to be failing in my personal life. Each promotion took me deeper into classified work that couldn't be discussed, celebrated, or acknowledged. Each new responsibility added another layer of secrecy between me and the family that thought I was drifting through life without direction or achievement. I made the airline reservation that night, Columbus via Denver, arriving Friday afternoon, departing Sunday evening. Just enough time to play the role of the disappointing daughter before returning to the world where Admiral Mitchell was respected, valued, and trusted with the safety of the nation. As I finalized the travel arrangements, I wondered if other flag officers struggled with this same disconnection. Whether Admiral Thompson had family members who thought he was underachieving, or if General Morrison's relatives questioned her life choices. The classified nature of our work created a peculiar form of isolation, successful beyond most people's imagination, yet unable to share that success with the people who mattered most. The countdown began. 17 days until I would sit at Jennifer's engagement party, listening to Catherine explain to relatives why her daughter still didn't have a real career, while carrying operational secrets that would reshape their understanding of what real responsibility actually meant. If they only knew that the family disappointment was spending her days preventing the kinds of disasters that would make their suburban concerns seem trivial by comparison. The Columbus airport smelled like overpriced coffee and hometown memories I'd rather forget. I collected my single carry-on bag. Traveling light was a habit that served me well in both military operations and family visits, and walked toward the rental car desk. The woman behind the counter smiled with practiced enthusiasm until she saw my military ID. "Oh, thank you for your service," she said, the phrase delivered with the same mechanical precision as the safety instructions on my flight. "Are you home on leave?" Something like that. The drive through Columbus reminded me why I'd been eager to leave for the East Coast 20 years ago. Strip malls and chain restaurants stretched along roads that led to subdivisions filled with people who measured success in square footage and luxury car models. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with that life. It just felt impossibly small after spending years thinking in terms of international maritime boundaries and global threat assessments. Catherine's house sat at the end of Meadowbrook Lane, a colonial revival with shutters that matched the neighborhood association's approved color palette. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the driveway recently sealed, the front door painted in a shade of blue that suggested prosperity without ostentation. Everything about the house screamed careful conformity. I sat in the rental car for a full minute before getting out. Through the front window, I could see Catherine arranging flowers in the living room, probably preparing for the pre-party gathering she'd mentioned in her latest email. The same living room where she'd lectured me about wasting my potential, where she'd compared my choices to those of more successful relatives, where she'd asked why I couldn't just settle down and practice law like a normal person. The front door opened before I could knock. Catherine stood there in a cream-colored blouse and pearls, her hair styled in the same cut she'd worn for the past decade. Her smile was warm but evaluating. The kind mothers are perfect when they're simultaneously happy to see you and disappointed in your life choices. "Sarah, you look tired." "Long flight. Good to see you, Mom." She hugged me briefly, then stepped back to assess my appearance. I was wearing dark jeans and a navy blazer, one of my 3 civilian outfits, but I could see her cataloging perceived shortcomings. Not dressy enough for Jennifer's party. No jewelry, no obvious signs of romantic involvement or financial success. "Well, come in, everyone's eager to see you." The living room was filled with relatives I recognized, but hadn't spoken to in years. Uncle Richard, who owned 3 car dealerships and never missed an opportunity to mention it. Aunt Patricia, whose children had all become doctors or lawyers. Cousin Marcus, fresh from his pharmaceutical sales triumph, wearing a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "Sarah," Marcus bounded over with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a safe target for condescension. "Mom told me you're still out in California. How's the Navy treating you?" "Fine." "Still doing the same thing? What was it?" "Logistics." Catherine appeared at my elbow. "Sarah works in transportation coordination," she said quickly. "She helps move supplies around." I bit back the correction that wanted to form. Transportation coordination. That was what Catherine had decided my job was, apparently. It was easier than admitting she had no idea what her daughter actually did for a living. "That sounds stable," said Aunt Patricia with the tone people use when they're trying to find something positive to say about career choices they don't understand. "Are there opportunities for advancement?" "Some." Marcus leaned in conspiratorially. "You know, if you ever want to transition to the private sector, I might be able to help. Pharmaceutical companies always need people with organizational experience. The money's a lot better than government work." I smiled without showing my teeth. "I'm happy where I am." "For now," Catherine interjected. "But Sarah's always been idealistic about public service. She'll figure out what she really wants to do eventually." The conversation continued around me while I stood there, like a museum exhibit labeled Family Disappointment. Uncle Richard shared updates about his newest dealership. Aunt Patricia described her daughter's recent partnership at a prestigious Cleveland law firm. Marcus talked about his vacation home in Hilton Head, purchased with bonuses from exceeding sales targets. Nobody asked about my work beyond Catherine's fictional transportation coordination narrative. Nobody inquired about my personal life, my interests, or my accomplishments. I was the relative who'd made questionable choices and was slowly, hopefully, coming to her senses about the importance of stability and conventional success. The irony was staggering. While Marcus bragged about selling pharmaceuticals, I was coordinating operations that prevented international incidents. While Aunt Patricia boasted about her daughter's legal career, I was using my Harvard law degree to navigate maritime law in situations that could determine whether American service members came home alive. While Uncle Richard talked about his car dealerships, I was making decisions that affected global shipping security. "Jennifer should be here soon," Catherine announced, checking her watch. "She's bringing David to meet everyone before the party tomorrow." David was the fiancé, also a lawyer, also successful by conventional measures, also someone Catherine could introduce with pride instead of apologetic explanations. I'd never met him, but I could already predict the conversation. He'd ask what I did, Catherine would deflect with vague descriptions, and he'd nod politely while calculating why a 38-year-old woman was still figuring out her career. The doorbell rang, and Catherine practically levitated with excitement. Jennifer entered in a flurry of designer perfume and perfectly coordinated accessories, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a law firm's marketing brochure. "Everyone, this is David." Jennifer's voice carried the particular pitch of someone who wanted to ensure her announcement reached every corner of the room. David worked the room with practiced charm, shaking hands and making the kind of small talk that suggested he'd been briefed on family dynamics. When he reached me, his grip was firm and his smile professional. "You must be Sarah. Jennifer's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope." He laughed the way people do when they're not sure if you're joking. "She mentioned you're in the military. That's really admirable." "Thank you. What's your specialty?" Before I could answer, Catherine materialized between us. "Sarah handles supply chain management for the Navy. Very important work, keeping everything organized." Supply chain management, another evolution in Catherine's creative interpretation of my career. I wondered if she'd eventually work her way up to help ships find their way around. "That must be complex," David said politely. "Lots of moving pieces in military logistics." "You could say that." Jennifer linked her arm through David's possessively. "David just became a senior partner at Whitman Stern & Associates. He's their youngest partner ever." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it. Success in civilian law required skills I respected, even if the stakes were different from the legal questions I dealt with in my work. "Thanks. What kind of law did you practice before joining the Navy?" The question hung in the air like classified information accidentally spoken aloud. Catherine's face went pale. Jennifer looked confused. Apparently, my Harvard law degree wasn't part of the family narrative Catherine had constructed. "I went straight from law school to the Navy," I said simply. David's eyebrows rose. "Harvard, right? That's impressive. What made you choose military service over practice?" The room went quiet. This wasn't part of the script. Catherine had spent years downplaying my choices, minimizing my career, treating my service as a phase I'd eventually outgrow. The revelation that I'd turned down traditional legal practice to join the Navy introduced complications to her narrative. "I wanted to serve," I said. "But Harvard Law Review opens so many doors," David pressed, genuinely curious. "Big law firms, federal clerkships, policy work. You could have done anything." I did what I wanted. Catherine stepped in quickly. "Sarah's always been different about these things. She has very particular ideas about success." The dismissal was subtle but complete. My choices weren't principled. They were eccentric. My Harvard law degree wasn't an accomplishment to be proud of. It was potentially wasted on idealistic notions about public service. My career wasn't respectable. It was a detour from the path Catherine had mapped out for a successful life. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror above Catherine's sink. The woman looking back at me commanded the respect of senators, coordinated operations across multiple continents, and carried security clearances that most flag officers would never see. But in this house, surrounded by these people, she was just Sarah, the daughter who couldn't figure out how to be successful by normal standards. Tomorrow will be worse. Jennifer's engagement party would be filled with their friends, colleagues, and extended family, all celebrating conventional achievements, while the family disappointment sat quietly in the corner, listening to Catherine explain why her daughter still hadn't figured out what she wanted to do with her life. If only they knew that while they measured success in salary figures and vacation homes, Admiral Mitchell was measuring it in lives saved and wars prevented. But those were achievements that lived behind classification levels they'd never understand, in a world where success couldn't be celebrated at cocktail parties or discussed over dinner. The countdown to tomorrow's public humiliation had officially begun. The Riverside Country Club ballroom sparkled with the kind of calculated elegance that spoke of wedding budgets and social expectations. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens, while servers in black ties navigated between guests carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvre that cost more per piece than most people spent on lunch. I stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd with the same systematic approach I used for threat assessment briefings. 200 guests, mostly Jennifer's law firm colleagues, and David's extended family. a sprinkling of distant relatives I hadn't seen since childhood. And at the center of it all, Jennifer in a rose gold dress that probably cost more than a junior officer's monthly salary, holding court like she was already practicing for her wedding day. Catherine had seated me at table 12, tucked behind a decorative column near the service entrance. The placement wasn't accidental, close enough to be present, far enough away to be invisible when photos were taken or toasts were made. My table mates were Jennifer's college roommate's parents, David's great-aunt from Toledo, and two couples I didn't recognize who seemed equally puzzled by their assignments to what was clearly the overflow seating. "You must be Sarah," said the woman to my left, consulting her place card. "I'm Helen Morrison. My daughter went to OSU with Jennifer." "Nice to meet you." "Catherine mentioned you work for the government. How exciting. What department?" Before I could answer, Catherine appeared at my shoulder with the timing of someone who'd been monitoring my conversations. "Sarah does logistics work for the Navy. She helps coordinate supply deliveries." Helen nodded politely. "That sounds important. All those ships must need a lot of supplies." "Something like that," I replied, ignoring Catherine's relieved smile. The evening proceeded with mechanical precision. Cocktail hour featured networking conversations between legal professionals who spoke in billable hours and partnership tracks. Dinner involved careful seating arrangements that ensured the right people sat near each other, while less important guests were relegated to the social periphery. I watched it all with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying tribal customs. During the salad course, David's father stood to make a toast. Richard Brennan was a senior partner at one of Cleveland's most prestigious firms, the kind of man who wore his success like expensive cologne, present but not overwhelming, noticeable to those who knew what to look for. "When David first told us about Jennifer," he began, champagne flute raised, "I knew she was special, not just because she's beautiful and intelligent, but because she shares our family's values: hard work, professional achievement, and building something meaningful together." Polite applause rippled through the room. Catherine beamed from the head table, where she'd been seated as the mother of the bride-to-be. "Jennifer has built an impressive career at Whitman, Stern and Associates," Richard continued. "She's what we call a triple threat: brilliant legal mind, natural leader, and someone who understands that success requires dedication and sacrifice." More applause. Jennifer glowed under the praise, her engagement ring catching the light as she reached for David's hand. "And David," Richard turned to his son, "has found someone who matches his ambition and shares his vision for the future. Together, they represent everything we hope for in the next generation: professional excellence, financial stability, and the wisdom to build their lives on solid foundations." The subtext was clear to anyone who understood the language of upper-middle-class aspiration. Success meant partnership tracks and suburban homes. Wisdom meant choosing careers that impressed at cocktail parties. Solid foundations meant avoiding the kind of unpredictable choices that led to uncertainty about your future. As Richard sat down, Catherine rose from her chair. She hadn't been scheduled to speak, but the evening's momentum seemed to carry her forward. She tapped her fork against her champagne flute until the room quieted. "If I may," she said, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom, "I'd like to add something to Richard's lovely toast." My stomach tightened. Catherine, with a microphone and an audience, was like watching someone handle live ammunition without proper training. As Jennifer's aunt and David's future mother-in-law, I'm so proud to see young people making smart choices about their lives and careers. Jennifer could have done anything with her law degree, but she chose stability and partnership, both professional and personal. Catherine's smile was radiant as she looked around the room. "It's so refreshing to see someone use their education wisely to build a career that provides security and respectability. Too many young people these days chase idealistic dreams instead of focusing on practical success." The words hit like precision-guided munitions. I could feel eyes turning toward my table, not with curiosity, but with the kind of sympathetic recognition that comes when people understand exactly who the cautionary tale refers to. "Some people," Catherine continued, warming to her theme, "spend years trying to find themselves, jumping from one thing to another, never settling down or building anything substantial. But Jennifer has always known what she wanted, and she's worked systematically to achieve it. The silence at my table was deafening. Helen Morrison studied her salad with sudden intensity. David's great-aunt from Toledo found something fascinating about the floral centerpiece. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with the object of Catherine's thinly veiled criticism. So here's to Jennifer and David, Catherine raised her glass higher, for proving that success isn't complicated. It's about making responsible choices, building stable careers, and creating the kind of life that makes your family proud. The applause was enthusiastic. Jennifer stood to hug Catherine, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. David beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose life choices had been publicly validated. And at table 12, behind the decorative column near the service entrance, I sat perfectly still while my mother used my cousin's engagement party to deliver a masterclass in passive-aggressive humiliation. But Catherine wasn't finished. As the applause died down, she held up her hand for continued attention. You know, I think about success a lot these days. What it means, how to measure it, why some people achieve it and others don't. My blood pressure was climbing toward the red zone. This was no longer subtext. This was a direct assault disguised as inspirational commentary. I have a daughter, Catherine continued, her voice taking on the tone of maternal disappointment, who had every opportunity to build a successful life. Harvard Law School, family connections, intelligence, potential. But instead of using those gifts responsibly, she chose to, well, let's just say her priorities are different. The room had gone completely quiet. 200 guests were now fully engaged in what was becoming a public dissection of family dysfunction. She's pushing 40 and still playing dress-up in a military uniform, convinced that she's saving the world by shuffling paperwork in some government office. No husband, no children, no real career progression, no stability, just this fantasy that what she's doing matters in some grand way. Helen Morrison actually gasped. David's great-aunt from Toledo looked mortified. At the head table, Jennifer was staring at Catherine with a growing alarm, as if realizing her engagement party was becoming a vehicle for family therapy. And the sad part, Catherine's voice carried across the silent ballroom, is that she could have had everything Jennifer has. Partnership in a prestigious firm, financial security, a normal life. Instead, she chose to waste her potential on some idealistic notion about service and sacrifice. That's when I saw him. He was standing near the bar, partially obscured by a pillar but not hidden enough. Commander Jake Stevens, former SEAL Team 6, current head of maritime security operations for the Pacific Fleet. He was wearing a Navy suit that didn't quite conceal his military bearing, and he was staring directly at me with an expression I recognized, the look of someone who'd heard enough. I hadn't seen Stevens in 2 years, not since the joint operation in the South China Sea, where his team had executed a hostage rescue that I'd coordinated from the command center. He'd been one of the operators I'd guided through 12 hours of complex tactical decisions, one of the men whose life had depended on the accuracy of my intelligence and the precision of my orders. He was also David's brother-in-law. Stevens stepped away from the bar and began walking toward the head table. His movement was deliberate, purposeful, and utterly confident, the walk of someone who'd decided that a situation required immediate correction. Catherine was still speaking, her voice gaining momentum as she warmed to her theme of disappointment and wasted potential. Sometimes I wonder if she'll ever grow up and realize that real success isn't about playing soldier. It's about building something meaningful, something stable, something that makes your family proud instead of, excuse me. Stephen's voice cut across Catherine's monologue with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard immediately. He had reached the microphone, positioning himself beside my mother with the kind of polite but unmistakable command presence that made conversation stop and attention focus. Catherine blinked, momentarily thrown off her rhythm. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "Ma'am, I need to interrupt you," Stevens said, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "With all due respect, I think there's something this room needs to know about your daughter." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice settling in water glasses 3 tables away. Stevens turned to face the crowd, his posture shifting into something recognizably military. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Admiral Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, recipient of the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, and one of the finest strategic minds in the United States military. The ballroom erupted. Not in applause, but in the kind of shocked murmur that happens when reality suddenly shifts beneath everyone's feet. Heads turned toward table 12, where I sat frozen in place while 200 guests tried to process what they'd just heard. Catherine's face went white. The microphone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a hollow thud that echoed through the stunned silence. And Commander Stevens, God bless him, wasn't finished. "Admiral Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom as he executed a perfect military salute. "It's an honor to serve under your command, ma'am." The ballroom stayed frozen for exactly 7 seconds. I counted them the way I'd been trained to count time during crisis situations: precise, measured, clinical. 7 seconds of absolute silence, while 200 people recalibrated everything they thought they knew about the woman at table 12. Then the whispers started. "Did he say Admiral? Sarah Mitchell, isn't that the one who—" "Naval Special Warfare? That's SEALs, isn't it?" Catherine remained standing at the head table, her face cycling through expressions like someone trying to solve a complex equation without enough variables. Confusion, denial, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like fear flickered across her features as she processed what Stevens had just announced to the room. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze in the ballroom. Commander Stevens maintained his salute, waiting for me to acknowledge it according to military protocol. The moment stretched between us, two professionals who understood the significance of what was happening while surrounded by civilians who were only beginning to grasp it. I returned the salute with the same precision I'd used in situation rooms and operational briefings. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of confirmation. Everything Stevens had said was true. "Commander Stevens," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "good to see you again." "The honor is mine, Admiral." The whispers grew louder as people began pulling out phones, typing searches, making connections. In the age of Google, it would take less than 30 seconds for someone to confirm that Admiral Sarah Mitchell was indeed a real person with a real record of service. Catherine found her voice first, though it came out smaller than usual. "Sarah, I don't understand. Admiral?" Jennifer stood from her seat at the head table, her face pale with dawning realization. "You really are?" "Yes," I said simply. "I really am." David leaned over to whisper something to Jennifer, his expression shifting from confusion to what looked like professional respect. As a lawyer, he understood hierarchies and achievements in ways that others might not. Admiral was not a participation trophy. It was not a title given to someone who shuffled paperwork or played dress-up. Stevens moved closer to my table, and I realized he was creating a buffer between me and the rest of the room. Professional protection, the kind that came naturally to someone who'd served in special operations. "Ma'am, I served under your command during Operation Neptune Shield," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Your tactical coordination saved 12 American hostages and prevented an international incident that could have destabilized the entire region." A woman at the next table gasped audibly. Helen Morrison, my dinner companion who'd been told I handled supply deliveries, stared at me with the expression of someone who'd just learned their accountant was actually a rocket scientist. "You coordinated hostage rescues?" Helen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Among other things," I replied. Catherine finally moved, stepping down from the head table platform and walking toward me with unsteady steps. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fact that all color had drained from her face. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" she asked, her voice cracking on the last word. I met her gaze steadily. "You never asked what I actually did. You decided what you wanted me to be and never showed any interest in who I really was." "But Admiral, that means you're—" "One of the highest-ranking women in Naval Special Warfare," Stevens supplied helpfully. "Admiral Mitchell commands operations across 3 continents. She's briefed senators, coordinated with NATO allies, and has security clearances that most flag officers will never see." The room was completely quiet now, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the uncomfortable hush of social embarrassment, but the focused attention of people trying to process information that fundamentally changed their understanding of reality. Uncle Richard cleared his throat from across the room. Sarah, we had no idea. Catherine always said you worked in logistics. I do, I said calmly. The logistics of preventing international conflicts and coordinating special operations. Not exactly the same as moving office supplies, but logistics nonetheless. A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but they died quickly as people realized this wasn't a moment for humor. Marcus, my pharmaceutical sales cousin, had gone completely pale. Earlier in the evening, he'd offered to help me find a job in the private sector because the money was better than government work. Now he was staring at me like I'd spontaneously developed superpowers. Jennifer finally found her voice. The whole time, all these years, you've been serving my country, I finished, just like I told everyone I was doing. But Mom always said, your mother, I turned to look directly at Catherine, created a narrative that was easier for her to accept than the reality of having a daughter whose career she couldn't understand or control. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. For 15 years, I've listened to lectures about wasting my potential and throwing away my opportunities. I've sat through family gatherings where my service was dismissed as a phase, where my choices were characterized as the mistakes of someone who couldn't figure out how to be successful. My voice remained calm, but the weight of accumulated hurt was finally finding expression. I've watched this family celebrate conventional achievements while treating my actual accomplishments as embarrassments. I've been seated at overflow tables and excluded from family photos because my career didn't fit the image you wanted to project. Stevens shifted beside me, and I realized he was positioning himself for what he probably recognized as an emotional firefight. In special operations, you learn to identify when situations were about to escalate, and you prepared accordingly. Sarah, Catherine started, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished, I said, and something in my tone made her stop immediately. It was the voice I used in crisis situations, when clear communication could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Do you know what I was doing last Tuesday while Marcus was selling pharmaceuticals and Jennifer was negotiating contracts? I asked the room. I was authorizing a joint operation with British Special Forces that prevented a terrorist attack on a civilian cargo ship. 17 crew members went home to their families because of decisions I made in a situation room that officially doesn't exist. The silence was deafening. 2 months ago, while you were all celebrating Jennifer's engagement, I was coordinating intelligence sharing agreements with NATO allies that identified and neutralized a human trafficking network operating across international waters. 47 victims were rescued, their names will never appear in newspapers, and their families will never know how close they came to losing them forever. I could see people at nearby tables leaning in, straining to hear every word. Last year, while Catherine was explaining to her bridge partners why her daughter couldn't hold down a real job, I was working with the State Department to prevent a maritime border dispute from escalating into armed conflict between 2 allied nations. The operation was so sensitive that 3 senators with top-secret clearances weren't authorized to know it existed. Catherine was crying openly now, but I wasn't done. I have spent my entire adult life serving something larger than myself, making decisions that affect global security, carrying responsibilities that most people can't even imagine. And through all of it, I've had to listen to my own family describe my service as a waste of potential. I stood straighter, feeling the full weight of my rank and experience settle around me like armor. So when you ask why I never told you who I really was, the answer is simple. You never wanted to know. You wanted a daughter who would validate your choices and reflect your values. When I chose a different path, you decided I was a disappointment, rather than entertaining the possibility that success might look different than you expected. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning cycling on. Admiral Mitchell, David spoke for the first time since Stephen's revelation, his lawyer's training helping him navigate the emotional minefield. I think I speak for everyone when I say we owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, I replied, but you might want to reconsider how you define success, and whether the people you've been dismissing might actually be accomplishing things you can't see. Catherine wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing her mascara. Sarah, I'm so sorry, I never meant to. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You meant every word you've said over the years. The only thing you're sorry about is that a room full of people now knows how wrong you were. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Stevens cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if I may, the Admiral has been nominated for the Navy Cross for her role in Operation Deep Current. The citation is classified, but I can say that her strategic planning and operational oversight prevented what could have been the largest maritime terrorist attack in history." More gasps from the audience. The Navy Cross was one step below the Medal of Honor, not the kind of recognition given to people who shuffled paperwork. I looked around the ballroom one final time, taking in the faces of people who were seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. Some looked ashamed, others impressed, many simply confused by the cognitive dissonance of reconciling their assumptions with reality. "Enjoy the rest of your party," I said to Jennifer, whose engagement celebration had just become something entirely different. "David, congratulations on your partnership. I hope you build something meaningful together." I turned to leave, but Catherine's voice stopped me. "Sarah, please, don't go. We need to talk. We needed to talk 15 years ago," I replied. "Now we just need to accept that some bridges can't be rebuilt, only replaced." Commander Stevens fell into step beside me as I walked toward the exit. Two military professionals leaving behind a room full of civilians who were still trying to process what they'd witnessed. "Admiral," he said quietly as we reached the lobby, "for what it's worth, that was the most effective strategic communication I've ever seen." I almost smiled. "Sometimes the best operations are the ones that don't require weapons, Commander." Behind us, the ballroom buzzed with the kind of intense conversation that follows a revelation that changes everything people thought they knew. The family that had spent 15 years treating me as their greatest disappointment was now trying to figure out how they'd so completely misunderstood their most successful member. The hotel room overlooked downtown Columbus through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the city lights like scattered diamonds. I sat in the single chair, still wearing the navy blazer and dark jeans from the engagement party, watching the traffic patterns below with the same analytical focus I brought to intelligence briefings. Movement, purpose, destinations unknown but somehow coordinated into a functioning system. My phone had been buzzing continuously since I left the country club 3 hours ago. 17 missed calls from Catherine, 4 from Jennifer, 2 from Uncle Richard, 1 from Marcus, probably calling to rescind his job offer now that he understood I outranked most of the people he'd ever met in his life. I turned the phone face down and opened my laptop instead. The secure connection took 30 seconds to establish, and then I was back in my real world, the one where Admiral Mitchell existed without explanation or apology. The operational briefing from Commander Walsh was waiting in my encrypted inbox. The Southeast Asia situation had escalated. Intelligence suggested a coordinated attack on international shipping lanes, timed to coincide with a major trade summit in Singapore. 3 allied navies were requesting American support for a preemptive interdiction operation. I scrolled through satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and tactical assessments, while the sounds of Jennifer's engagement party played on repeat in my mind. 2 hours ago, I'd been the family disappointment who couldn't figure out her life. Now I was reviewing intelligence that could determine whether global commerce continued uninterrupted or whether international waters became a battlefield. The irony had sharp edges. My secure phone, the one that mattered, chimed with an incoming call from Admiral Thompson at Joint Special Operations Command. "Sarah, I heard about the party." News traveled fast in military circles, especially when it involved flag officers and dramatic revelations at civilian social events. "Stevens briefed you?" Stevens briefed everyone. "You should see the message traffic from Norfolk. Half the Pacific Fleet is talking about how Admiral Mitchell shut down her family at some country club in Ohio." I almost smiled. Military gossip networks operated with the efficiency of intelligence services, particularly when the story involved someone getting their comeuppance in spectacular fashion. "It wasn't about shutting anyone down," I said. "It was about setting the record straight." "Same difference. Listen, we need you back on station earlier than planned. The Singapore situation is moving fast, and SecDef wants your assessment before we commit assets." "How fast?" "Wheels up tomorrow, if possible. This could go kinetic within 72 hours. I looked out at Columbus again, at the ordinary city where ordinary people lived ordinary lives that didn't involve preventing international incidents before breakfast. 24 hours ago, this had been home. Now it felt like a place I was visiting. Interesting, but ultimately foreign to who I'd become. I'll catch the first flight out, I said. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Catherine, then deleted it, started again. Deleted it again. Some conversations couldn't be conducted through written words, and some relationships couldn't be salvaged through apologies alone. Instead, I pulled up the secure planning interface for Operation Southern Shield, the codename for the Singapore interdiction mission. 3 carrier strike groups, 2 allied submarine patrols, and a joint special operations task force were moving into position based on intelligence assessments I'd helped coordinate over the past month. In 48 hours, I'd be managing an operation that involved more personnel and resources than most small countries possessed. But first, I had to finish what had started at Jennifer's party. The knock on my hotel room door came at 02:00. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting it since I left the country club. What surprised me was that it was Jennifer alone, not Catherine. "I couldn't sleep," she said when I opened the door. She was still wearing her engagement party dress, but the careful styling had given way to exhaustion and emotional overload. "Come in." She sat on the edge of the bed while I returned to the chair by the window. The city below had quieted, but emergency vehicles still moved through the streets. Police, ambulances, fire trucks responding to crises that happened while most people slept. "I keep thinking about all the things I said," Jennifer began. "All the times we treated you like I was wasting my life?" She nodded, tears starting again. "I had no idea, none of us did. Admiral? Sarah, that's like being a general, isn't it? Similar rank structure, different service. And you command special operations? Like Navy SEALs?" "Among other units, yes." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, processing information that fundamentally changed her understanding of family dynamics. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I'd been asked that question more times tonight than in the previous 15 years combined. The answer was more complex than most people wanted to hear. Because the work I do requires security clearances that come with legal obligations about what can and cannot be discussed. Because operational security means protecting not just missions but the people who execute them. Because some aspects of national defense work better when they remain invisible to the public. I paused, choosing my words carefully. And because this family had already decided who I was and what my choices meant, telling you I was an admiral wouldn't have changed the fundamental problem. Which was that you measured my success by your standards instead of understanding that different people might define achievement differently. Jennifer absorbed this with the methodical approach she probably used for complex legal arguments. "David looked you up on his phone after you left," she said. "There are news articles, congressional testimony, something about a Navy Cross nomination. Some of it's public record. The articles say you're one of the most decorated women in naval history, that you've prevented terrorist attacks and coordinated international operations, and..." She stopped, overwhelmed by the scope of what she was learning. "And your mother spent the evening telling 200 people that I was a disappointment who couldn't figure out how to be successful." The words hung between us like an indictment. "She feels terrible," Jennifer said quietly. "She's been calling everyone she knows, trying to understand how she got everything so wrong." "She didn't get it wrong," I replied. "She got exactly what she wanted, a narrative that made my choices into failures so her values could remain unquestioned." Jennifer flinched at the directness of the assessment. "That's not. I mean, she loves you. We all do. You love the idea of who you wanted me to be. You've never shown much interest in who I actually am." The truth of that statement settled over both of us like dust after an explosion. "What can we do?" Jennifer asked. "How do we fix this?" I looked out at the city lights, thinking about the question. In military operations, you could fix tactical errors through better planning and execution. You could fix equipment failures through maintenance and upgrades. You could fix intelligence gaps through better collection and analysis. But you couldn't fix relationships that were built on fundamental misunderstandings about respect, support, and what it meant to choose service over conventional success. "I don't know if it can be fixed," I said honestly. 15 years of dismissal and condescension isn't something you apologize for in a single conversation. Jennifer started to respond, but I held up a hand. But there's something you can do, if you're serious about understanding what went wrong. Anything. Stop trying to measure other people's success by your own metrics. Stop assuming that because someone's life looks different from yours, they must be failing. Start asking questions instead of making judgments. I turned to face her directly. And recognize that the people you've been dismissing might actually be accomplishing things you can't see or understand. My phone buzzed with another secure message. The Pacific Fleet was requesting updated threat assessments for the Singapore operation. In 6 hours, I'd be on a plane back to a world where Admiral Mitchell's decisions carried the weight of international consequences. I have to leave in the morning, I said. There's a situation developing that requires my immediate attention. Military situation? The kind that doesn't make the evening news unless we fail to handle it properly. Jennifer processed this with visible difficulty. The idea that her cousin was racing back to prevent international incidents was apparently still hard to reconcile with 15 years of family narrative. Will you stay in touch? I considered the question carefully. Family relationships, like military alliances, required mutual respect and shared understanding to function effectively. You couldn't build lasting partnerships on false assumptions and conditional acceptance. I'll stay in touch, I said finally, but the terms are different now. I'm not interested in being tolerated as the family disappointment. I'm not available for lectures about life choices or comparisons to other people's achievements. Of course, I understand. I'm also not interested in being suddenly celebrated now that you know my rank. I was the same person yesterday that I am today. The only thing that changed was your information, not my worth. Jennifer nodded slowly. That's fair. After she left, I returned to the operational planning interface and spent 3 hours reviewing intelligence assessments and tactical options for Southern Shield. By dawn, I had a preliminary operational framework that would coordinate American naval assets with Allied forces across a theater spanning 2,000 nautical miles. The flight to San Diego departed at 0830. I was in first class, not because of military protocol, but because I'd learned that the extra space helped when you needed to review classified materials during transcontinental flights. The passenger manifest showed S. Mitchell, consultant, which was technically accurate if you considered preventing international wars a form of consulting. Somewhere over Kansas, my personal phone chimed with a text from Catherine. Please call me. I need to understand what happened and how to make this right. I deleted the message and opened the Southern Shield tactical brief instead. 3 terrorist cells had been identified moving assets into position along major shipping routes. The window for preemptive action was closing rapidly. In 18 hours, I'd be coordinating a multinational operation that would either prevent a significant attack on global commerce or fail spectacularly in ways that would reshape maritime security policy. The flight attendant offered me lunch. I asked for coffee and kept working. By the time we reached San Diego, I had a complete operational plan that would deploy assets from 3 Allied navies in a coordinated interdiction pattern designed to neutralize the terrorist cells before they could execute their attack. The plan was elegant, efficient, and had a 93% probability of success based on current intelligence assessments. Commander Rodriguez met me at the airport with a secure communication device and an updated intelligence briefing. Admiral, the situation has accelerated. We have confirmation that the attack is scheduled for tomorrow at 1,400 hours local time. All Allied commanders are standing by for final authorization. I scanned the updated intelligence while Rodriguez drove us back to Coronado. The terrorist cells were moving faster than anticipated, but their operational security was deteriorating under time pressure. That gave us opportunities for interdiction that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. Signal all commands, I said. Operation Southern Shield is authorized. Execute on my order. Yes, ma'am. As we crossed the bridge to Coronado, I could see the training compound where the Phoenix team was conducting night exercises. The same team that had executed Neptune's Trident 6 months ago was now preparing for their next deployment, trusting that Admiral Mitchell would provide the strategic oversight and tactical support they needed to complete their missions and return home safely. That was the weight I carried, not the disappointment of family members who couldn't understand my choices, but the responsibility for operations that shaped global security and the lives of people who trusted my judgment with their safety. My phone buzzed with another message from Catherine. I glanced at it briefly, then turned the phone off entirely. Some conversations could wait, others couldn't. In 4 hours, I'd be in the Situation Room coordinating an operation that would prevent terrorist attacks on international shipping. The success or failure of that mission would ripple outward in ways that would affect global commerce, international relations, and the security of millions of people who would never know how close they came to disaster. That was my real world, the one where Admiral Mitchell existed without apology, explanation, or validation from people who measured success in partnership tracks and suburban homes. 6 months later, I received an invitation to Jennifer's wedding. The envelope was addressed to Admiral Sarah Mitchell, in formal script, with my full rank and title printed in gold lettering. The return address showed Jennifer and David's new home, a colonial revival in a prestigious Columbus suburb that looked remarkably similar to Catherine's house. I RSVP'd with regrets. That weekend, I'd be briefing the Joint Chiefs on a new maritime security initiative that would reshape how America protected its interests in international waters. But I sent a gift, a crystal vase from Tiffany with an engraving that read, "Congratulations on your marriage. May you build something that matters. Admiral S. Mitchell, USN." Catherine called 3 days later. "Thank you for the gift," she said. Her voice was different, smaller, more careful. "Jennifer loves it." "Good. Sarah, I've been thinking about everything that happened at the engagement party, about all the things I said over the years. I need you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I just didn't understand." "I know," I said, cutting her off gently. "Understanding isn't the same as supporting, and supporting isn't the same as respecting someone's choices even when you don't understand them." There was a long pause. Can we try again? Start over somehow?" I looked out my office window at the Pacific, where a carrier strike group was conducting exercises in preparation for their next deployment. Somewhere in that formation were officers and enlisted personnel whose careers would be shaped by decisions I made in the coming months, whose missions would succeed or fail based on the strategic frameworks I developed, whose families would sleep safely because of operations they'd never hear about. "We can try," I said finally. "But it's going to be different. I'm not interested in pretending that 15 years of dismissal didn't happen, and I'm not available for conditional acceptance based on whether my achievements impress your friends." "I understand." "Do you? Because this isn't about you finally being proud of me. It's about you learning to respect choices you don't understand, and people whose success doesn't look like your definition of achievement." Another pause. "Yes," Catherine said quietly. "I understand. Then we can try." The conversation lasted another 10 minutes, careful, tentative, but genuine in ways that previous family communications hadn't been. When it ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for 15 years. The possibility that relationships built on false assumptions could be reconstructed on foundations of mutual respect. But that was a project for the future. At the moment, I had more immediate responsibilities. The secure line was buzzing with updates from the Mediterranean, where Allied naval forces were coordinating anti-piracy operations based on intelligence assessments I'd provided. The Phoenix team was requesting updated tactical guidance for an operation scheduled to begin in 6 hours. And the Secretary of Defense wanted a briefing on maritime security threats that could affect American interests over the next 18 months. I answered the secure line first. Some calls could wait, others shaped the safety of the world. Admiral Mitchell had work to do. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.